How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I wanted to talk about one of my favorite cactuses, or cacti, I guess is the proper terminology. And it's Echinocactus Polycephalus, or Polycephalus, and it's also known as the cotton top barrel cactus and the multi-headed barrel cactus because its fruits look like little cotton balls, and it usually is a multi-headed cactus out in the wild when people are finding it and appreciating it. So today I wanted to talk about this cactus a little bit, its overview or an overview on it, some of the threats that it's facing, some of the conservation that is going on with it, and so this cactus, the cotton top cactus, is from the Mojave Desert here in California. It's native to California, Arizona, Nevada, and I think Sonora in Mexico. So there's 3 subspecies, 2 of them being in California, and I think 1 is particular to Sonora that is not in the United States. But the different species crisscross a bit in the Sonora and the Mojave Desert. But over here, I've got a lot of Echinocactus Polycephalus, the red barrel cactus, as well as the subspecies of that cactus, Xeramides, which is the all golden barrel cactus version. And then, this isn't a subspecies, but I also have tons of cactus that are pretty much hybrids that are like combinations of the red and the gold, and I call them EP duos, short for Echinocactus Polycephalus duo, because they have both of the colors of the subspecies in the cactus species. So over here on my land, I've done a couple surveys of the cacti, and I have a little bit over 2,000 of them spread out over all my lots, and maybe 95% of that is the red cactus, and 4% of it being the gold red combination, and 1% being the all gold Xeramides subspecies. So those are pretty rare in this species, and then the combinations are relatively rare, and the majority of the species is just the red, all red. And all of the species or the subspecies are gray or silver until they get wet, and then they turn red, gold, or in one case I've seen one of them turn orange, which I'm not sure if that's a separate subspecies or whatever, because I haven't seen anyone else find one or describe it. It's usually red or gold, so this orange one's kind of been tripping me out, but yeah, I'll put it in the podcast image, so you can see how it looks. It's pretty cool. So why am I even talking about this cactus today? And I really think this is a cactus that should be propagated more throughout California, because it's really strong. I mean, it can take frost, it could take light snow, it can take 0 Fahrenheit cold all the way up to 125 Fahrenheit heat. It could take massive amount of wind, usually Every other day we have winds here from 15 to 30 miles an hour. You know, it's not uncommon to see winds of 45 to 60 mile an hour here, and the cactus never cares much for the wind. It's a relatively slow growing cactus, but it's just strength is its help there, and making me like it, I guess, because it's so hardy of a cactus. It's very difficult to cultivate from seed, which is why you don't see much of it. It takes a long time to grow, and it's difficult to grow. But I think we should be growing more of it for some of the reasons I'll explain in a little bit. But this cactus, I was just talking about the survey, the population survey of the cactus on my land, and over 90% of all of the cacti that I have of that species is over, I would estimate, 100 years old. So they were cacti that were born essentially, at the turn of the 20th century. So, they're pretty old already. And what you don't see is the young cacti. You don't see really any of the softball, golf ball, single-headed cacti. And I started to ask myself, why isn't there many of them? And it's definitely a combination of reasons, but probably the biggest one is a changing climate that has brought less rainfall to the area, has made the area hotter, has made it colder, has made the area have less forage for animals. So now small rodents like ground squirrels and jackrabbits and coyotes are putting more pressure on these cacti than presently or than there was in the past. And they're eating a lot of these smaller cacti that haven't built up the spines yet in its first years, because it really takes kind of like 3 to 4 years for this cactus to put out its first spines when it's growing. And once it has those spines, it kind of forms a cage around the cacti to not get eaten up and stuff. And so if I'm not seeing a lot of those young ones, they're being eaten before they have a chance to be resilient right out in the wild. And so I estimate on the high end, maybe I'm assuming that I didn't find a lot of the small cacti, but maybe they're there. There's a 1% propagation of the wild seed. If I'm honestly being a little bit more realistic, I'd probably put it at 1% of 1%. So, because like I mentioned, I don't see very much young cacti, but I'm assuming there's a bunch hidden there that I don't see, right? So it's pretty pitiful what the propagation rates of this cacti out are in the wild. And as I said, a changing climate and ecosystem for this cacti is not helping, because maybe 100 years ago it could propagate at a good rate and the population was building itself well. But how I see it, I think that within 100 years, or within my lifetime at the earliest, there's not going to be any more of this Echinocactus Polycephalus in the wild anymore, because from the numbers that I'm seeing, all the population is pretty old and from the past century. And it's kind of weird because like the seeds in the seed pods are really, really healthy, and I collect tons of them and propagate them myself, and I can get 75 to 80% germination rates. And I'm growing these cacti on a massive scale to try to prevent its destruction out in the wild, because essentially my whole thing is this: I think if I can grow a lot of these cacti to year 4 or 5 to where they have good spines and reintroduce them to the wild, then I can essentially restore the young populations of this cactus in the wild, in my area at least, and by providing the seed to be, to nurseries and different cactus enthusiasts and growers, we can hopefully grow more of it and restore and have the population really healthy, right? Because up to today, I've been selling seeds for about 4 to 5 years, and I've probably sold over 700,000 seed. And I mean, I talk often to the people that are buying seed from me, and the lowest germination rates I've seen from a professional grower is 25 to 30%, and a lot of these growers are achieving rates that I am, 60 to 80%. One grower in particular had an 85% germination rate, which, I mean, the guy's crazy, because as I'm telling you, max propagation in the wild is probably 1%. And to add to all that climate change and animal pressure, when you think about it, people really want this cactus. They're buying it online at ridiculous prices because it takes so long to grow, and it grows so slowly that they want these big mature plants, and they're willing to pay big bucks for them, right? So people are ripping them out the wild, and I've had tons of them poached from my lands. But the hold on, my goats are walking kind of far. I'm back. What I was saying is that when you really think about it, a lot of these poached cacti that people are gonna more readily get are the smaller versions, because I mean, most of these cacti are extremely remote and in tough to reach places like national and state parks. And people, if they can get a cactus from the wild, they're usually going to get a small golf ball or softball sized one of the young ones that they can easily pluck out the ground. But you're not gonna pull out a mature Echinocactus Polycephalus unless you know what you're doing, and it takes some time, and you'll probably get a couple of your hands bleeding in the process. Like, I've done removals of these in people's gardens and stuff, and they'll take out the whole garden. And once I found out they were growing on my land natively, I would repatriate them, basically bring them to my farm, start growing them. And a lot of them were in really bad shape, because when people take over this little portion of the desert and they have these cactus growing and then they make a garden, they're usually watering the crap out the garden, and these cactus suffer because they really, really hate water. And so they're usually in bad shape, and I bring them and I don't even water them for like maybe a year or two, and they'll prop up, most of them. But my point is that a lot of the cactus that I was removing from gardens of this species was super tough to take out. I mean, like, unless you have some heavy equipment, like, it's pretty tough. And it'll probably take you with a super sharp shovel 20 to 30 minutes. So it's not like someone's going to go out to the wild and do it pretty often. But there are professional, I would call it, poaching operations, because like on my land here, I've seen people fill up trucks, and they have a very professional method of extracting the cactus, and they scout out the areas. They know which places to go to, or which hills that have the most of them and stuff. And that's why on a lot of my bigger cacti I have trackers, and I've got game cams set up, and I've persecuted one of the most craziest operations of that. But that's kind of besides the point. People are just evil sometimes. But Don't go jacking people's plants, because some people got the power and resources to go after you. But yeah, getting back on track, I mean, these threats to the cactus have made it, in my opinion, a very endangered cactus. And when you look at the IUCN, which is like the organization that red list or list endangered plants, and they're always updating it, they list this cactus as least concern because there's tons of them in the wild, you know. But going back to my population survey, the tons of them that people see in the wild are all giant. They're big, they're old, and you don't see young populations. So I think their data is very wrong, to be honest with you, because if there's no young populations, these cactus have finite lifetimes. They're going to die out. And when they die out, if there's no young cactus replacing them, that species is done. You get me? Like I put it to you this way. Should, you know, looking at agave maybe as an example of what we don't want to happen, the IUCN also lists agave as least concern. I don't know who the hell made that classification, you know, but the California State Parks sees it as an endangered agave. There's very few populations of it still left in the wild in the United States, and you know, in my opinion, it's one of the most endangered agaves. So to have it listed as of least concern is crazy. And you know, we shouldn't wait until the last populations of agave right, to bump that status up. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. Like, you should try to save the plant before it gets endangered, right? And realize what the hell is, you know, the writing on the wall, as they like to say. So, in, you know, correlating it back to this cactus, we don't want to wait until they put it at an endangered listing, because then it'll be too late. Because a lot of these cacti are taking very, very long time to grow. Like, I give an example, you know, in a healthy setting, max growth rate, you might be looking at a 1/4 inch a year. So a 1-inch cactus might be 4 years old, 3-4 years old. And most of the cacti are probably growing at 1/8 of an inch a year, because they're not growing under optimal conditions. You get me? So yeah, they're growing so slow, and we're not going to have the time to try to propagate these at the end, you know. So seeing the writing on the wall, I'm like, well, I'm not going to wait until they list it as endangered. I see it already as endangered, so I might as well try to help and save it, right? And that's when I started collecting seed on a massive scale, propagating it on a massive scale, and now a couple years later, I've got a lot of the seed that I propagated as little baby plants, and I'll put them out in my farm, and I put it in the rockiest areas, because when I go in the wild and I see them growing, they're growing on hillsides that are like hard to walk on, and it's growing straight out of rock and super crap soil, barely any soil. So when I grow them in mostly all rock, and then the roots might be in a tad bit of rocky soil. But the majority of the pot is just rock, and you don't want them ever to sit in water. So I'm going around the rockiest places around my farm and planting them with a little fence piece that I cut up on top so they're not predated on. And then every year I'm going to be checking up on them, and when they crash into that fence, they should be at significant spinage, which is what I call it, to withstand rodents and stuff. So you know, maybe they won't withstand a coyote, but they're going to withstand most of the pressure from the animals. And you know, I'm hoping for a 25 to 50% success rate. In the first year of this project, I probably have, you know, I haven't seen too much damage, to be honest with you. I'm probably looking at an 80 to 90% success rate. So I got good hopes for it, but, you know, one day it could change a lot. Like a coyote could come and just eat them all. tear up my fence little protections, and you know. So I'm staying optimistic but realistic at the same time. But hey, if I get the low ball 25%, and as I said, say I collect 10,000 seeds and I propagate them and get a 75% germination and throw them out in the wild, and I get 25% of those to hit, that's pretty good. I'm content with that, I'll be happy with that. And because that's going to be magnitudes higher than what the wild is producing, right? So that's where restoration efforts could come in handy, because you can, if you're getting one out of every 10,000 seeds to hit in the wild, and you're over here restoring the land with 3,000 of the cactus, that you grew per 10,000 seeds, that's huge. You're growing 3,000 times more than what the wild is, right? The problem with that, obviously, I would love to change the climate and make them propagate on their own, but I guess what I'm trying to say here is that they'll never be wild again. They'll always be semi-cultivated because you grew them and put them in the wild now, right? But the genetics can still change, because, for instance, they're going to be in the wild after the first few years. They're putting out their seed, and maybe this new seed that you grew had some genetic differentiation that allowed these guys to make it, in this new world, this new climate. So, and that's some of the stuff that I try to do. I try to even train them on getting less water than what they get out in the wild in my greenhouses. So I on purpose try to forget about them for 6 months or a year and see what happens on certain portions of them. So, I see they're super hardy on water. I'm like, well, what if I could cut their water in half, because say the climate has cut the water in half that these cactus are getting now, and that's why they're not propagating at successful rates in the wild. And I introduce a cactus now with genetics that has been growing in the greenhouse at half water and, still growing at optimal rates. That's what I'm talking about, that the reintroduction of stuff can start helping a lot. And then obviously the first year that they throw out fruit, the new species will be wild now again, but the stuff you reintroduce will just be semi-wild, right? But so this cactus face a lot of threats. It grows really slow, as I mentioned a few times, but I was really researching the other day, trying to read different articles and see what the oldest cactus in the world was, right? And I kept coming across this one saguaro that everybody kept saying is the oldest cactus in the world, right? And they pin it at 300 to 350 years old. And doing some calculations on my cactus that are 4 and 5 feet wide, I've been getting numbers from 250 to 350 years old based on their growth rates in the wild that people have researched. And the more and more I'm thinking about it and calculating, I'm just like, I don't think that it's that saguaro, to be honest with you, because there's some Echinocactus Polycephalus that is, for instance, 5 feet wide, and if they're growing a quarter, or an eighth of an inch a year, let's do some quick math real quick. Let's see actually what it would be. So if you take 400 years and you times that by 0.125 a year, which is the growth rate, right? You're going to be left with 50 inches. You divide that by 12. Oh, no. Give me 1 second. Goat was getting away from me. But what I was mentioning is that if you take 400 and times it by, 0.125, which is 1/8 inch, you're going to get 50 divided by 12. You get 4.16 which is essentially like 4 feet, I don't know, like 3 inches or something, right? So I've seen Echinocactus Polycephalus 4 or 5 feet wide. And I'm over here like, oh wow, well, I definitely know that there's 300-year-old Echinocactus Polycephalus, but I would venture into saying there's 400-year-old. And, some of these cacti I think should be studied a little bit more, because they actually might be the oldest cacti in the world, if they are at that 400-year mark. And, just like really, really old trees, you think about it, these cactus every year are capturing tons of, carbon. They're sequestrating carbon. And, imagine millions, if not billions, of this cactus throughout these states that I mentioned, Arizona, Nevada, California, Sonora, carbon capturing for centuries. Some of these cacti are older than the United States. And, they live on, in many cases, so little water, it's incredible. It's like over here we get an average of 2 inches of rain a year. So they're living on less than 2 inches of rain a year, because many of the times they're on hillsides that, maybe aren't capturing the water as efficiently. It's just running off really quickly. So they're just getting water, and the water is running off, unlike something maybe out here in the valley where my main farm is, that, the valley isn't like the mountains. The water stays pretty much. So these cacti can live for a long time, sequester carbon, and do it for no resources, basically. You never have to water them. They live off the rain, and in many cases, you don't have to buy any special soils or anything for them. I just grow them on top of native soils and use tons and tons of rock, to be the first inch of the roots and upwards to give it stability. So not like you need any big fancy soil for it. So yeah, this cactus is very amazing on the climate that it could take, and the resources that it uses. So I imagine a future where it's grown by the millions, if not billions, in California, because you think about all these landscapes that are throughout, Kern County, Imperial, Riverside, here in LA, Northeast LA County. It's all this desert that's just, really empty some of the times, the public lands that they maintain, because they don't have, the resources to bring in all the irrigation piping and plant a bunch of trees and do all this stuff, But it's like, if this plant was accessible, from nurseries by the massive scale, they would be planted everywhere, because they're plants you could put on super rocky hillsides, like on I-15 over there in Riverside, where nothing grows, and, on public rights of way, and you could just, have good carbon sequestration from these plants growing on public land, and, you could repopulate the areas where their populations are downing, and, it could be a really big help. But that just brings me to the point that I'm collecting more and more seed of it, because they can't grow it if they don't got the seed. So most people are selling this seed from 50 cents to $1. It's crazy. I mean, for a seed, that's too expensive to try to massive scale it. So, I've got it down to the point where I'm efficiently collecting them. I got my routes. I've got ways of collecting it and sorting it that have boosted my efficiencies. And I'm able to offer the seed for like 10 cents a seed most of the time. A lot of my clients that are buying in bulk, like, they might buy 50,000 seeds, and I might give it to them for 6-7 cents a seed. So, I mean, this incentivizes people to want to grow them massively, because, as I mentioned, people are poaching a lot of them, and, they got really high value. So people want to grow them. The problem is that they need to get seed, and it needs to be at an affordable rate for them to generate a profit, because it's going to take such a long time for this cactus to grow, right? But yeah, I encourage more nurseries, even if you don't buy seed from me, to try to grow the cactus, because we shouldn't wait until our California native plants are endangered. If we're seeing the writing on the wall that they're getting screwed, we should try to save them before and take them out of this peril, right? And a population stability, going back to that IUCN thing, isn't determined by its population size. It's also determined by its population distribution. You get me? Like, how many of these species are old, how many are young, and are they still readily propagating? Like, what's their germination and their survival rates, right? These are things that these organizations need to start taking into account, not just the freaking numbers, because in one small decade, that number thing could change very quickly, if you're not looking at all these other factors. I remember when I first bought this land, and I would walk and see all of these cacti. I really wanted to always be taking pictures of them because they were super cool and stuff, and I want the next generations to have the opportunity to walk through the wild and see this cactus, because it's like there's tons of creosote and rabbit brush. I mean, I could cut down as much of that to the trunk and it regrows, but it's like there's very few cactus here across a lot of land that I have, and I'm just like, you start multiplying that out at scale across the Southwest, and you're like, well, there's not very many of these cacti to begin with. And if they're going downhill, you got to do something. So yeah, I think a lot of people always tell me, well, how do you stop the cactus poaching? You can't catch everyone and you can't persecute everyone, and that's my way of doing it. Massive propagation, because it's like, I'm gonna make your market so like the reason they poach them is because they could go get a cactus out the wild that's 4 feet, that's a couple hundred years old, and sell it for $1,000 or $2,000, $3,000 in China or Thailand or whatever, right? I don't know how the hell they get this shit through customs. I mean, it's not like it's a small cactus, you get me? But the reason they do it is because there's such a big profit behind it, you get me? But the reason people even buy those big plants is because they don't, one, know that they're coming from the wild, and two, they have no access to the plant. So they go search for the plant online, like, oh, I want to buy Echinocactus Polycephalus. No options. You know what I mean? No seed, no plants. So people are like, well, if I see a poached plant, fuck it, I'll buy it. Which, I don't agree with that reasoning, but I assume that's how that reasoning is happening. And I think if there was millions of this cacti propagated and available in nurseries around the world, then you would have no need to buy poached cactus, because they're available everywhere. You get me? And they're available at affordable rates everywhere. So, and the other thing is education. So let me tell you 2 stories. The first one on Echinocactus grusoni, and the second story will be on the Huntington. Well, Echinocactus grusoni is the golden barrel cactus, the cactus a lot of people have in their gardens. Well, this cactus was at one point like the barrel cactus I'm explaining to you on this podcast, very endangered. There was people from Asia, Europe, all over the world that were wealthy going to Mexican villages, paying the villagers, money, in some cases like days' wages. It's crazy. And they were going and selling this cactus, like they're paying them pesos, and they're going and selling it for hundreds of dollars in their markets. And it led to this cactus, being screwed over. Like, there was very few of them left in the wild. And then a lot of really, I'm not sure who did it, but just looking at the overview as a person reading on the history a bit, I'm like, it looks like the nurseries in California and the NGOs and the government, all of these people came together to support the mass propagation of Echinocactus grusoni, and now it's available, millions of them, if not 1 billion of them, throughout California for everyone to buy and put in their gardens, right? So now, why would you go buy a Mexican village poached grusoni when you know that there's massive amounts of them grown, and you can go to Home Depot and buy one? You could go to your local nursery and buy one. They're available freaking everywhere at affordable rates, right? So I think they staved off the poachers by making it, their market disappear, essentially. So that's what I want to do here. And, if they're available in massive rates, then I don't think people will try to take them out the wild anymore. And when people have a little baby one at their house, they're going to want to respect the wild stuff, because they're like, I have to take care of this cactus like this much, and wow, I can't even imagine this giant one in the wild, like, let me go appreciate it and take photos of it and try to conserve it. So the second story, the Huntington, a lot of poached plants, even from collections. So you go to the Huntington in San Marino, California, and look at their, world-class gardens. They got a lot of cacti and agave there, and, some of their plants have been poached even from the freaking garden. It's crazy. And they'll put up a little sign where the plant is poached, saying like, oh, plant poaching is happening all over the world, like, find out more. I don't exactly remember how they worded it, but taking a negative moment and making it a teachable moment. And I was like, wow, that's really cool that the Huntington is doing, and I'd love every person that grows this cactus and sells it at their nursery to just include a little sticker, on the pot, like, thank you for buying seed grown Echinocactus, Polycephalus, and not supporting poached poaching operations of this cactus. Simple little 1-2 sentences, and people, they get high on that shit, man. I swear, like, people, they want to do the right thing a lot of the times, right? So it's like, when you reinforce it in them, they're gonna be like, yeah, fucking saving this shit. But those two stories I think are pertinent to the Echinocactus polycephalus, because there's lots of examples on how to take plants out of endangerment. You get me? And how to educate people about poached plants. So I think combining those two stories, in my case, I want to grow a massive amount of them, destroy the poaching market, make it available everywhere for people to plant it everywhere where there's low resources, right? And at the same time, by selling all these plants, or seeds in my case, I want to educate people about the poaching of the cactus and to not support it. You get me? To support the conservation of it by buying the plants or the seed, or donating to people that are conserving it. I mean, I was reading an article the other day about how people in Imperial County are trying to conserve this cactus, and I'm sure if you look for native plant NGOs or little companies, they'll be down and grow this cactus. Like, I reached out to the Theodore Payne Foundation, that they grow a lot of California native plants, and I told them, hey, if you ever want to grow this cactus, I got a bunch of its seed. I didn't want to make a super long message and tell them like why I'm even doing this, right? But maybe they could listen to this podcast and realize growing some of that seed would be cool, right? Because a lot of the agave that they grow, California native agave is agave under threat too, like the shawi and the shawi subspecies, and they grow some deserti, I know. Populations that are diminishing a lot. So I know that that's kind of like their whole role too, trying to help a lot of the endangerment with California native plants, But I wanted to also tell you a little bit about what I do to propagate this cactus in seed. The container, I fill it with 80% native cactus soil from here. So it's going to be like sandy loam clay mix, and then I'll put in 80% small gravel rocks or pumice if I have it, and then put the seed on top of that, and then put like an inch of little baby gravel that I also collect here for free. And then that's how I've seen the seeds pop out the most, growing in a medium that is like ultimate drainage. They're never sitting in water. and they basically just get the water passed through them and go down, and then there's a little evaporation later on where they also get some humidity, right? Another thing that I've seen helps boost the germination rate. Seeds have this little thing called the hilum, which is where they're attached to the actual fruit, and when you collect the seed, it kind of like seals up, and if you scar that little hilum, like just Google seed hilum and it'll show you a description of the place I'm talking about. If you scar that with a knife, it'll collect water and resources better from the soil, and I've seen it's doubled my germination rates. So some cases for people it's tripled them, because like I had one guy go from 20% to 60% just by doing that. I kind of went from 35 to 70% by doing that. So different for everybody, but mostly everybody's getting at least a double in germination. So that's something that I recommend if you're propagating this seed. If you happen to get, like if you're a gardener or a landscaper and happen to take them out and then you want to put them in pots and stuff, don't put them in just soil. They're gonna fucking die. Put them in like I just mentioned, the seed combination, except their roots is going to be the substrate, right, that I just mentioned, like that 80% rock, 20% cactus soil mix. But then there's a portion of the plant when they're larger that's kind of like black or gray before the cactus starts. Never put that in soil. It will rot the cactus. So you can put gravel and rocks to propagate it if you need to, or to prop it up, but never plant that piece of the cactus in the soil or it's going to die. I see a lot of people, like, they got good intentions, like they'll save this cactus and like they'll be like, yeah, I know, like you told me about how they're poached and stuff, and I took them out this garden that this lady had me clear, and I put them in pots and now they're dying. And I'm like, dude, like, good intentions without good knowledge. You know what I mean? Like I felt bad because I'm like, he took out like 40 of these cactus and they all were dying, and I saved them by just telling him put them in gravel, just straight gravel for like a couple months, dude, because he had been watering them, and I'm like, no, they live off rain, you know. Don't need to water them even if they're in pots. But yeah, you know, I hope more people grow a bunch of this cactus, and it's got some pressures on it. There's a lot of people trying to conserve it. You know, I got, if you need seed available, other people have it available on eBay or Etsy. And then, you know, there's people growing a lot of the small plants like me. In some cases, people like me that are gardener or landscapers, they might have some of the cacti that aren't poached. But don't overpay for them. I will mention almost every time that a gardener or a landscaper is taking this cactus out, it's a paid job. So they're not taking their care with them. They're likely not going to come with roots. Like, I give an example, most of the cacti that I've brought here, you know, like I'm even putting myself in this position. Like, I got to work at this house for a few hours. I only got a few hours, and I'm trying to save this cactus on top of the job I'm already doing. So I'm trying to take them out fast, and I pull them with no roots sometimes. And, you know, a little softball sized cactus that I grow in my greenhouse will have like an arm full of roots, you know what I mean? Like as big as the cactus will be of roots. And then, you know, I'll get this like 300-year-old that just has like the same amount of roots. So that's also how you could tell if a cactus is poached or not, you know, or at least from the wild or not, because the seed grown stuff is going to have roots like crazy versus the wild stuff, because people aren't taking their care of taking them out. They're going to rarely have any roots. And if they do have roots, they're going to be like cut and, you know, really messy. So, yeah, that's one way to see, you know, that the stuff you're purchasing is legit. Always ask people too, you know, like people, when they buy this seed from me and the plants, they always ask me like, oh, where'd you get it? Like, and I'm like telling them about my whole operation here, you know. So I finally put it in the seed listing description, and I'm like, yo, I don't collect more than 25% of my seed. You know, I'm doing it for this purpose, trying to save the cactus and propagate a ton of it, and then offer for other people to propagate a ton of it. And I commend those people. You know, you should be asking the nurseries where these cacti are coming from and how they got their seed. You know, like a lot of people, because their seed is expensive, they'll try to like go to national parks and state parks and steal the seed. And then if you do that, the wild populations don't have an ability to repopulate in that area. You know, and most of the time, inexperienced growers are doing this. So then their germination rates, like, I mean, I know people that have gone into the wild and taken some of this seed, and then they have like a fucking 5% germination, and they're like complaining to me how difficult the cultivation is. And I'm like, man, it's almost like God like made no seeds pop out for them because they got the seed in a bad way, you know. But yeah, I don't want to make this podcast too long. It's already 45 minutes, I guess, but I just wanted to come on here and let you know about this beautiful cactus that is native here to the Southwest in California. And you know, it's one of my favorite cacti. It's potentially the oldest cacti in the world, and it's under threat. And you know, I want people to help out conserving it, even if you're not gonna grow it. Just, you know, if you see somebody stealing plants or seed, you know, at Joshua Tree National Park or something, just let them know, like, hey man, like, you know, that plant's already endangered, you're screwing it up more, you know. If you see somebody buy a plant of it, ask them how they got it, you know. Be conscious of this stuff. And yeah, I'm you know, happy to provide seed to any you know, nonprofit that is growing this, you know, wants to help propagate this. You know, I got a couple batches of the seed that I just set aside for organizations like that, that I don't even want to really sell it to. I just want them to grow it and put it out, you know, because as many people as we can to help this cactus, that would be the best case scenario. But yeah, have a great rest of the day, and hopefully you learned something about Echinocactus Polycephalus, the cotton top barrel cactus, and you realize that a lot of our California ecology is really beautiful and needs to be protected. So I'll catch y'all later on another podcast. I've recorded a whole bunch of them, but you know, I'm just got a lot of stuff on my plate right now that I'm working on. So I'll try to release this one today, and then I recorded another one on the 10 coolest things I'm seeing in agave today around the world. Hopefully I could put that out today as well, or tomorrow. And then I'll try to put out the part 2 of agave shawi, and the one I promised you guys about why I think California wine should become California cactus wine, right? Let's see what's up with that. Catch y'all later. Have a good one.